I promised this a while ago. I love the show called Primal. Is it Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal? Somebody sent me an Iceberg a while ago. So I'm looking forward to the Iceberg. We just never really got to it, but let's get to it now, bro. Let's get to it now, right now. Let's get to it right now. Let's get to it right now. Let's do this right now. Right now. While we play World of Warcraft. Going pretty hard right now, if you ask me. Is it low?
Ever since my last Iceberg video, people have been wanting me to cover different sorts of dinosaur-related icebergs, mainly ones revolving around walking with dinosaurs or carnivores dinosaurs.
Bro, do the dinosaur icebergs that apparently dinosaurs look like chickens. It's a real thing. Dinosaurs apparently used to look like chickens. They had feathers and whatnot. They didn't actually look like dinosaurs. Crazy, right?
Hunter. But ever since the iceberg trend really gained traction, I have been waiting patiently for someone to make an iceberg on Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal. Yeah. If you don't know what Primal is, it's an animated show that was aired on Adult Swim revolving around a caveman named Spear and a
It's such a good show. Bro, I have to tell you, like, it's such a good show. I loved it, and it's one of those shows where, like, you can't look at your phone while you watch it. But it makes you not want to look at your phone because the whole storytelling is through what happens in the show, like what's going on. It's about what's going on. You have to pay attention to all the context. Like I remember times there were a few times where I would put my phone down, or I'd take my phone to my face for like 30 seconds. I'm like, I missed everything that was happening because everything is done visually, like every piece of the story. It does a really good job of not being full of like a bunch of filler. Pretty much everything in the story is very contextually necessary, and they fill out the time really well. Whereas, like, you know, a lot of other shows, especially animes, will show you like, you know, like some weird walking animation or something for no reason.
Tyrannosaur named Fang, who go on adventures and fights different things in the brutal world that it's set in. There are tons of spoilers in this video, so if you're interested in this show, then maybe don't watch this video first.
Yeah,
just go watch the show instead. Seriously, I highly recommend it. It's actually a really good show. Anyways, after months and months of waiting for an iceberg on this show, it never happened. So I figured if no one else was going to do this, then it was up to me to do it for them. But I needed some help with this, so I decided to reel in my aquatic friend Pish, who also happens to be a primal enthusiast, to help me set up this iceberg. And after a few hours of digging around, getting distracted, and literally getting nothing done, we got started on the iceberg. And after a couple of more hours, this was the outcome. Now, before we go any further, here's a bit of context for those of you who aren't familiar with how iceberg videos work. Iceberg charts are a recent trend in which entries of a specific topic, like video games or movie franchises for example, are taken and put in a list that begins with the most well-known or common things around said topic, and as you go down that list, these entries begin.
Yeah, there was one point that I got like really wrong, and hopefully he'll bring it up. There was a point towards the end, again, like this is your last, you know, call. If you want to watch the show, like you should kind of dip off. But you won't, like, so that you can kind of watch it in its glory. But there was one point where, like, he fights like a Viking, and the Viking ends up dying. And after it dies, he gets like raised to Valhalla, and it was a really crazy moment. But then he gets sucked down into like hell in some capacity. And I was like, oh, you know, it seems like the hell demon wanted to suck him down specifically so that he could, like, you know, kill primal guy, Fang and Spear. And I was like, oh, this is stupid, because the show came off to me as some people experiencing the world, whereas it kind of changed it to like the world actively against them. But I got it wrong. Apparently that was like some kind of like a god of vengeance in like the Nordic you know, whatever. And I just got it wrong, and that was like a really interesting thing. Hopefully they go through it so I have like a better understanding of it, and it can be better communicated, because I'm obviously an idiot.
More obscure, strange, and even creepy depending on the topic you're covering. There are several different versions of these icebergs all around the internet that literally cover anything you can think of. There's even one that literally revolves around fruit. This is a trend that I've grown very interested in, so much so I ended up making a video on an iceberg that someone had made about Jurassic Park. But unlike that video, the iceberg chart that will be featured today is one that we created on our own. And if you don't know about Primal all that much, it's a rather minimal show, and because of that, a lot of the entries here are things like behind the scenes information, fan theories, random pieces of trivia about the show, and so on. With these entries included, it not only lets us talk about the lesser known things about Primal, but also doesn't make the iceberg feel so empty. Of course, there may be debate as to the placement of the entries we decided upon the iceberg and whether or not they should be on the iceberg at all. Please keep in mind that the decision for the placement of the entries and the decision to add certain entries within the iceberg are simply decisions we made based on our own personal opinions. We spent a long time deciding where they should be placed and also wanted to include stuff we wanted to talk about. If you want to debate either of these two things in a civil fashion in the comments below, that's perfectly fine with us. Besides that, fucking deal with it. Anyways, let's get into the video.
All right, tier 1, baby.
The first thing we have on our list is the show's first real enemy to our main characters. The trio of Red Rexes first appear in the beginning of the first episode and are responsible for the death of Spear's family. After collecting food for his family, Spear makes his way back home only to hear their screams from a distance. He tries to get to them as quickly as he can, but right as he gets there, he witnesses the pack brutally devouring his whole family. We see the pack again when they try to attack Fang and her offspring, but with the help of Spear, the two manage to kill the entire pack and prevent the offsprings from being eaten by them. But then the Alpha Rex shows up and devours the baby Rexes.
Bro, this was such a horrible moment in this show. It made me so upset when this happened.
Super chatted $9.99.
Hey, thank you so much for the $10.
Hi Papa Gut, I'm so happy to catch your live. Hope you and Mama Gut are having a good day.
Sorry, I just need to sneeze. Yes, thank you so much. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the donation. I appreciate that. What was really interesting at the end of this episode, after this happens, like the once they like the way that they unite was like so interesting and unique to me. Because at the end of the episode, like, you know, he helps save the kids, but then the kids end up getting eaten, the dinosaur babies. But then at the end of the episode, like, there's this really interesting moment of, apprehensiveness from Spear, which is the caveman guy, obviously. Where, like, he wants to befriend Fang, because Fang is the one that's, like, introducing the friendship, basically. Like, let's kind of, like, hang out together, you know? Let's trauma bond. And he's, like, scared of it. And I remember thinking, like, if this was 15 years ago when I was a kid, I'd look at this and go like, trust the dinosaur, trust the dinosaur. But for some reason, like maybe it's because I was older, or maybe the show did a better job of communicating that this was an animal. You know, it was like I would be so terrified even after that experience to like befriend a fucking dinosaur. You know what I mean? It was such an interesting experience that I can't communicate unless you watch it yourself.
After more fighting though, Spear and Fang do eventually take her down as well. The main features from the T-Rex pack, besides their red color schemes, are the horns that differentiates each individual Rex. The pack themselves are incredibly hostile and seem to just attack, kill, and eat anything that they come across. What differentiates the pack from the Alpha Rex, besides her own uniquely shaped horn, is her massive size. Aside from these features though, there doesn't seem to be anything too unique about these guys. That being said, they were a great way to introduce the audience to the kind of brutality that we would see in the rest of the show. The snakes are the main enemies in the second episode of the season, but in many people's opinions, it's one of the more lackluster ones.
Absolutely not. The episode itself maybe is a little lackluster, but one of the awesome parts of this episode that I loved is that it actually sets up for like genuine and unique character building between Spear and Fang. Like it shows some of the versatility for Spear and like what he brings to the table, even though he's not physically as strong or as capable necessarily as a fucking literal bloodthirsty dinosaur, but at the same time it brings like a lot of emotions to Fang, because in a follow-up episode you see that Fang, the dinosaur, sorry I have to differentiate for myself almost, has PTSD from the experience, where like she sees a worm because it's a girl dinosaur and she's like afraid because she remembers the snakes. And it was like such an interesting character building situation. Like it was an incredible, like if you watch it like properly and you really absorb as much as you can from the episode, even that lackluster episode will show a lot to you in the way of context.
In most of these episodes, you'll notice that the main enemies are unique, or have unique features, or have specific motivations for wanting to kill Spear and Fang. But in the second episode, the snakes are just kind of there. While Spear and Fang try to overcome certain obstacles of their newfound friendship, they run into an ocean of snakes, and when a flood eventually engulfs the area, including our two characters, they then have to kill off a mega snake, which ends up getting killed off screen, so nothing too exciting there. The most I could say about the snakes that might even be remotely interesting is that I think they're supposed to be titanic boas. But besides that, there's not much to say about it.
I like that episode. That was decent. I kind of disagreed with that. Wild dogs.
Next up, let's talk about another group of antagonists that appeared in episode 1
handsome
of the
voice.
first season, The Scent of Prey. I'm of course referring to the wild dogs who tried to sink their teeth into both Spear and an injured Fang through.
This is, I have to say, this episode was probably my favorite a collection of 2 episodes. If you guys have been on TikTok, you've probably seen the episode where like there's a bunch of monkeys fighting Fang and Spear in some capacity. At the end of that episode, Spear ends up like, you know, drinking some kind of like, it was crazy. Watch the episode. Crazy. He drinks some kind of crazy serum, and it makes him like super temporarily strong. It was fucking crazy. It introduced like some like a religious or spiritual aspects. It was kind of crazy. But he like protects Fang and more like character development. It was incredible. And at the end of it, like the next episode is him like walking, you know, protecting her, the dinosaur, from like vultures. It was a really interesting episode. And then moving on to protect them from dogs. And then like it was just an incredible episode that showed like a lot of companionship that I really like liked and identified with
throughout the course of the episode. And while the pack of canines don't seem to have much going in terms of iconicness or impact, there's a lot more to them than meets the eye.
Yeah.
First up, the wild dog's designs. Now at first glance there isn't anything too special here, with simple grays, browns, and blacks making up their palettes, with some spooky blood red eyes to top it off. The designers were clearly inspired by African wild dogs, also called painted wolves. And this in turn made me think of these creatures called
You know what's weird? I know this is like a weird thought. I remember watching a nature show a while ago, and like what was nuts is that like I never thought about this, but in the wild, cats are fucking more dominant than dogs. Like the cats are huge fucking lions and tigers. Dogs are just kind of like a little bit bigger dogs. But in like our households, like, dogs would dominate. I know that's like the most fucking dumb thing I've ever said, but it's kind of interesting if you don't think about it too much.
Game Cry Primal. The game is set in 10,000 BC and also features a caveman who similarly has animal companions and likes to get into brutal bloody fights a lot of the time. Now the dhulls, as they're called in the game, also look just like African wild dogs and hunt in large packs. They are even confirmed to be based on the extinct subgenus of canine Xenocion. I know that it's a bit of a stretch to say that the wild dogs in Primal are based off the dhulls from Far Cry, but you have to admit the resemblance is there. Moving on from the design aspect, there was also originally going to be an additional scene featuring the dogs that ended up being cut in the Scent of Prey. However, we do have access to how the scene would have played out via the animatic pitch of the episode. The scene would have shown 3 wild dogs entering the cave as Spear originally left the entrance open, allowing them to attempt an attack on Fang. This would result in one of the dogs being killed by Spear, who would do what he does best by impaling it with his weapon of the same name. The scene would end with the partners in crime enjoying some meat from the dog's carcass. We obviously don't know why this scene was cut from the episode, but I think it would have been a good scene to show the bond our 2 main characters have made over the course of the show. So yeah, in summary, there's a lot more.
I think that they did that accurately. I think that they showed that bond pretty well. So
more to the wild dogs than you might have expected, and I even think it would be cool if they see a return to the show sometime in the future, as they're one of the only groups of antagonists to survive a battle against Spear and Fang and live to tell the tale. Super interesting nonetheless. The Mammoth Matriarch is one of the most interesting antagonists we've gotten throughout the course of the show. Spear and Fang encounter the Matriarch and her herd in the episode A Cold Death as they attempt to take revenge on the pair.
I thought it was a patriot. Well, okay.
In favor of their fallen brethren. But the reason why the Mammoth Matriarch is so interesting is because of the resolution at the end. Unlike every other episode where we
Well, yeah, it was very interesting because it showed like this potential spiritual side to it showed a potential spiritual side to animals. It was like the first time I've ever considered that there could have possibly been like we're all animals and like maybe there is some kind of spiritual aspect or nature because the animals, it looked like they were walking to some kind of an elephant graveyard in some capacity, right? It looked like they were walking to some elephant graveyard in some capacity. And at the end, the mammoth died. Like it struggles at the beginning and it dies at the end. But when they went to venture for it, they just wanted like the tusk and some kind of spiritual thing. So it introduced the concept that there could be some kind of like interesting like spiritual nature to animals in some capacity, which was really interesting.
We get our main characters disposing of a threat either by spearing it, biting it in half, spearing it, beating it to a pulp, spearing it, burning it alive, spearing it. The episode ends with Spear offering
Mahogany XD super chatted $4.99. Been following since May last year.
Hey, thank you so much.
How are you liking it so far? Big ups, Papa. Folded hands.
I like YouTube a lot. Thank you so much.
Mammoth's tusk to the matriarch as a show of respect and gratitude, and also as a way to bail them out of what might have been a fatal confrontation. And the episode actually...
This episode actually did like a really good job of like differentiating Fang and Spear, like subtly and slowly. This was like one of the things that happened. Because they show that Fang doesn't care about like any type of spiritual nature. So it was like interesting that, you know, they would show some animals might have some kind of like... you know, spiritual nature, but Fang didn't give a shit, but like Spear did, and they were completely losing that fight until he gave up that tusk out of like that show of respect and whatnot. And it was like another instance of showing the separation between the two of them.
Ends with the matriarch acknowledging this act and leaving the two in peace, only to return to a vast mammoth graveyard with the tusk. And that's why this episode is so interesting. It's one of the only ones that doesn't end in more blood being spilled. I also think the fact that the episode revolved around the mammoths and a caveman coming to a peaceful resolution is a big deal and a good message. After all, we were the ones who drove these amazing creatures to extinction in the first place, and they should deserve our respect.
Fuck extinction, dude. Hey, listen. It's fucked up, but like back then I feel like extinction didn't matter as much as now. Like now we take active roles in like destroying environments and whatnot. Back then we were just animals, and like unfortunately, whether you want to hear this or not, extinction is like kind of a natural cycle of life. Is like when one species can't hang, they kind of pass away. Nowadays it's different because we have like so much control over the world. Back then we didn't really have a ton of control over the world in the same profound way. So April's Fool's
On April
episode.
1st of 2020, a Primal episode had been aired completely out of nowhere. For context, back in October of 2019, Primal had aired 5 episodes, with the 5th one ending on a massive cliffhanger.
Interesting, because I saw the zombie episode and I was like, this one was very bizarre. First of all, the show did a really good job at presenting an idea that I didn't like and then making me like it. That was one of the things I respected a lot about the show, was that it would take a lot of risks, which is something that I really respect about shows. There was an episode that I hated, by the way, but I liked it because they took so much of a risk. And this thing is just stuck on a wall. For shame, brother. And this one was one of them, but I ended up liking it at the end. It was a zombie episode. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are there zombies? This is getting weird. By the end of it, I'm like, wow, this was actually really cool. They did it really well. But they never really talked about it a lot. And then also, when the first zombie bit the big brontosaurus, I guess it was, he turned into a zombie. But then after this guy bit other people or other dinosaurs, they didn't turn. It was weird, but it was a good episode.
Without going on too much of a tangent as to what happens in that episode, it ends with Fang unconscious and presumably near death, with Spear desperately trying to wake her up. It's an extremely emotional scene, and it ends before we could get a definitive answer on Fang's critical states. Then the show went on a 1-year hiatus, with 5 more episodes being planned for the rest of the season to air a year later.
Oh, that makes sense. So that was like the big thing I saw on TikTok, what I was explaining before, with like he drinks the serum and he fights all those monkeys and shit. So then they went on a vacation, and they came back with that April Fool's episode, almost on Halloween. Interesting. So that makes it more impactful. I watched all of it in a burst. I watched like everything in a burst, so it didn't come off the same to me. That impact wasn't there. I wasn't like waiting for it. I just watched it all towards the end of both seasons, which were good.
In October of 2020. So from there, it was a waiting game to see whether or not Fang managed to pull through. But all of a sudden, fans had been given an unexpected but exciting surprise, and that came in the form of a random episode of Primal that aired on April 1st of 2020. At first, some thought that this was the show's official return, but there was a problem. Technically, this is the 6th chronological episode of Primal in
Interesting. I think when I watched it, they played it after the 2-parter. So they knew that they kind of that wasn't like in the correct order. Okay, interesting. Because I don't remember it like interjecting.
In terms of being aired, yet in this episode,
yeah, watch the show for sure. It's
completely
awesome.
fine. There's no
Max.
explanation
think,
or instance of her healing process anywhere within.
I think it's on HBO or Adult Swim.
The episode, and it's almost as if they had completely glossed over the massive cliffhanger from the previous episode. And when people saw this, they began to suspect that it was either possibly a spin-off episode from the main storyline, or maybe it was aired out of order as a prank on the viewers for April Fools. And as it turns out, the episode had been aired out of order. The episode was called The Plague of Madness, and it featured a sauropod becoming infected by a viral disease that we will discuss later in the Iceberg. Seeing how at the time we were in the middle of the pandemic, people suspected that this was possibly one of the reasons why this particular episode was aired out of order from the rest, but eventually the rest of the episodes aired in October later that year, revealing Plague of Madness to actually be the 7th episode in the season.
Yeah, okay, that's how I saw it. Interesting. Better not be a fight. Okay, good.
Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal Tales of Savagery is a Primal movie, but not the kind you'd think. When a list of 32 movies were announced to possibly get nominated for the Oscars in the category of Best Animated Feature, Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal was on that list. This was rather unusual because to qualify as an animated feature, you had to be an animated movie, and to be a movie, you had to have a runtime of at least 40 minutes. And Primal was neither. At this point in time, Primal was a 5-episode series with each episode being around 20 minutes long. So to be able to qualify for this list, Adult Swim had submitted a version of Primal called Tales of Savagery that retold the first 4 episodes in the season in a way that felt more like an anthology movie rather than a limited series.
Can we watch that? Is that available somewhere? That's fucking awesome. I want to watch that.
Because of this, the runtime requirements were met, and Primal was officially on the list for movies to possibly get nominated for an Oscar. But unfortunately, Primal was not selected for the nomination, and even though Adult Swim had said that they didn't plan on giving this version a wide release, you can buy or rent a digital copy of it on at least YouTube, from what I've seen.
Maybe I'll do that. gotta run away before I die. Krog. Which one is this?
Okay, let's talk about the Ape Men Arena champion from the
this was
episode
weird
Rage
as
of the
fuck.
Ape Men.
That's
now,
what
I'm
I
sure many
keep
of you already
referencing.
have a general gist of how this guy is thrown into the plot. He's first introduced in the arena with his fellow Ape Men who proceed to duke it out hard. He ends up being victorious, granting him the honor of choosing a Triceratops skull helmet and drinking a drop of the Ape Shaman's black substance to prepare him for his battle with Fang, who he nearly beats to death if it weren't for Spear's intervention via ripping off his arms like Jax from Mortal Kombat. In summary, he's your standard run-of-the-mill antagonist of the episode along with the other Ape Men. But what you might not know is that the Ape Men Arena champion actually has a canon name that is listed in the cast at the end of the episode, coming in the form of Krog. Due to Primal being a mostly dialogue-ridden show, cough cough Slave of the Scorpion, the name Krog was never directly spoken in the episode, but I personally think that giving this guy's name that small amount of recognition is appreciated and makes Krog feel more like a character rather than another creature for Spear and Fang to have a beatdown with. The Mega Spider for me is easily one of the coolest and scariest obstacles that Spear and Fang have ever
That was
faced.
a weird
Like,
episode,
if your
bro.
pet Tyrannosaur can't take down
It was a weird episode because a bunch of weird fucking bats were going around capturing fucking people to feed to a dinosaur. I mean, to feed to a spider. It just didn't really make a lot of sense to me, but it ended up being really cool.
a spider, you know you're in for a bad day. Armed with its massive size, horrific jaws, and a web shooter protruding from its mouth instead of its butt, this arachnid was a terrifying force that would have ended up killing Spear if it weren't for Fang having a big brain moment and learning to play dead. But what if I told you that the Mega Spider was originally going to possess an additional ability that would have made it all the more terrifying? In the animatic pitch of the episode, when the Mega Spider first confronts Fang, it begins to radiate a high-pitched sound from its mouth, described by the narrator as a kind of hypnotizing hum, which causes Fang to become drowsy. The way it's described sounds kind of like Jigglypuff singing from Pokemon, except instead of drawing on Fang's face with a permanent marker, the spider would then proceed to shoot out its webs for a surprise attack. Like a lot of the other scrap content, there's not much context given to why this was cut in the first place, but it definitely would have made the Mega Spider even more scary than it already is, and that's saying something.
In their early development stages, each episode of Primal obviously had their own pitch meetings, or animatics if you will. And because these were just early sketches of the episodes, obviously they didn't have any sound or anything in them. So to fill in that gap, Genndy Tartakovsky presented the animatics by summarizing the events of what was going on as they played. And not only did he do this, but he also covered the sound effects for them as well, which is 100% the best parts of these animatics. Here are a couple examples of what I mean.
Okay. Interesting.
Let's go. All the other dinosaurs look.
I mean, that's exactly how I pitch a fucking dinosaur show.
This has to be my favorite thing in the world right now. It's just so fucking funny. What makes the animatics this far down the list is due to some of the things that they hold. Some of the animatics show dinosaurs and creatures that didn't make it into the final cut, minor scenes here and there that were cut out as well, and early designs of some of the animals that look different from the ones we see in the final cut. A lot of these changes were pretty minor though, but there are some that we found so interesting we made them their own entries here on the Iceberg. We'll go more in depth with those changes as we get to them.
You know, it seems kind of cringe that he would do that, but like realistically speaking, you really have to sell your product. And if you're not willing to do some dumb fucking cringe shit like that, you're never going to get your product to be sold. That's just kind of like the reality of the situation.
This one's pretty self-explanatory, and honestly not all that surprising. Seeing how Genndy Tartakovsky also created Samurai Jack, it only makes sense that the fan base would try and connect the two shows in an attempt to conclude that
I didn't know that. I didn't know he made Samurai Jack. That's fucking awesome, bro.
they're both within the same universe. If you don't know what Samurai Jack is, it's also an animated show that Genndy Tartakovsky created, and it was aired on Cartoon Network and was aimed to be more kid-friendly, with the exception of its final season, which had aired on Adult Swim. The show itself revolves around a samurai that is trying to liberate his kingdom from the power of the show's main enemy, Aku, who is a shape-shifting demon. One connection from these two shows that I've seen is how the
I remember the voice actor for Aku passed away. I think it was the same one as the Uncle Iroh from Avatar. Sad stuff.
From episode 5 is similar to the black ooze from that of Samurai Jack's main villain, Aku. However, I'm not really a good enough source to tell you whether or not this theory is solid, as I didn't watch Samurai Jack all that much when I was younger. What I
mean, that might be a solid theory. Maybe it is. Maybe that is something, a connection between the show. That's fucking awesome. What are you talking about? It's fun to think. It's fun to think about it, you know? I think it's like really fun to think about that.
Can tell you though is that given Tartakovsky's overall intentions with Primal, it doesn't seem like he's trying to actively connect the two universes
not in a heavy
as one,
way, but
and
it's
anything
like
that
it
could
might
be
be a
seen as a
nod.
possible link between the two shows is either a coincidence or a reference.
That's kind of cool.
If you watch Primal, you're most likely familiar with Genndy Tartakovsky, the guy who made it. I mean, his name is literally in the show's title, like how could you miss it? But yeah, Genndy has made a lot of other cool shows over the years, such as Samurai Jack, but he's also the creator
Now that I saw his face, I feel like it's like the dream reveal. I didn't want to see it. You know what I mean? Like I liked that he was just, because I thought of him as a rugged, powerful, bearded warrior, and he's just kind of like a smooth Richard Gere type of person. So now it kind of ruins it for me a little bit, but That ain't too bad. It's alright.
popular cartoon show from the 90s called Dexter's Laboratory, which explores the idea of a young super genius.
Wait, he made that
who
too?
whips up gadgets and gizmos in his lab throughout the course of the series. In one episode called Old Flame, Dexter creates a time machine and brings back the caveman who discovered fire from prehistoric times, proceeding to show him the joys of the 21st century. However, there's something very interesting about this caveman in the way that he looks, in that his design bears a striking resemblance to another caveman from another one of Tartakovsky's shows. So yeah, just looking at these two, it's clear that the Dexter's Lab caveman greatly influenced Spears' final design in Primal, and it acts as a nod to one of Tartakovsky's best works. There's even
or maybe that's just like a stereotypical caveman. He drew them both there, and there is no actual connection. But it's cooler to assume that at some point he gets fucking time traveled, and we just don't see it.
Another much more direct nod to this that comes in the form of a 15-second bumper on Adult Swim, the channel that Primal airs on. Now, if you don't know what a bumper is, it's a 15-second clip that plays before a show starts on Adult Swim, and they've been an iconic element of the TV channel for around 20 years now. In this specific bumper, we get Spear animated in a more cartoonish Dexter's Lab style coming through a time machine, proceeding to make his way around the laboratory, and end the clip by pressing a button that lights up the Adult Swim logo. Another thing to note is that this isn't the only Primal bumper that appeared on the channel. There's a whole host of them that aired at different times, all in different styles. One is animated in a Disney style, there's a cute Flintstones reference with Spear being locked out of his cave by Fang, and there's one where the two are just screaming at each other, which is oddly hilarious. But yeah, for those who have never watched Primal on Adult Swim, these bumpers may come as a surprise, and I hope we get to see more of them when Season 2 starts to air at some point in the future.
That's cool. Maybe there was like a plan that this kind of existed for a long time, and like he had this idea rolling around the back of his head, but he was probably locked into making kids shows at this point, so he didn't really like have like a really rooted out idea of that.
So yeah, this next one's a bit of a mixed bag, and I mean that because now we're talking about the scientific accuracy behind many of the creatures. And I know the thought of that might totally flip some people's biz, because Primal is pretty famous for being an extremely inaccurate representation of the prehistoric world, due to it being set in a...
You guess you never know. There is magic in it, but you guess you never know. Which, by the way, I wish there wasn't, but they do it. It's done so well that it doesn't ruin the show. I just personally wish that there wasn't as much magic. I liked Season 1 more than Season 2 for this absolute simplicity of it. Or at least the beginning of the season, where like it was just like this very raw, gritty, two characters exploring the world, getting into like a random adventure that wasn't like super, I guess, in depth or super deep or any of that kind of stuff, you know. So then as they introduced more, you know, or I guess less realism, I was like, I'm not a big fan of this, but it still was such a phenomenal show. I just personally wouldn't have went that direction, but like, well, I mean, I didn't write the fucking show. I'm not dick worth the shit, so.
A fantastical prehistoric setting rather than a realistic one. But we're not here to talk about the many inaccuracies the show has in store, because one, we'd be here all day, and two, who even cares about an insanely graphic show about a caveman and a dinosaur being inaccurate in the first place? It's pretty clear that Genndy and the Primal team don't care too much about that stuff and just want to show us the wonders and horrors of the way our protagonists in this savage world. Yeah, but that being said, this doesn't mean that scientifically accurate representation isn't in the show at all. Far from it, in fact. There are many scenes and characters that pay homage to or reference modern paleontology and science, mainly coming in the form of the humanoid characters, including Spear and the sacrificial ginger from Coven of the Damned, the albino caveman from Terror Under the Blood Moon, the ape men from Rage of the Ape Men, the tool-brandishing monkey guys from Slave of the Scorpion, and lastly, Mira. The special thing about each of these humanoid characters has to do with each respective group being based on a real-life hominid.
I loved Mira and Spears' relationship. It was fucking incredible. It's probably the most poetic thing about the show. And honestly, let me not even say that. The relationships in general were fucking phenomenal. Because the relationship between what's happening? Okay. Because the relationships in general were fucking amazing. You know, with Spear and Fang had a really good relationship, and Mira and Spear had a phenomenal relationship. The ending of the show couldn't have been better. It was so good.
Such as the ape men resembling and possibly being designed around Australopithecus. Each of these hominids will be covered in more detail in the respective segment, so stay tuned for that, as it's actually pretty cool to dissect some of the design aspects behind these guys to determine which of our prehistoric ancestors were the inspiration for them. Hey, I remember the monkey caveman from Terror Under the Blood Moon, mostly from this funny meme template, but that's besides the point. These guys are actually the first in the long list of alternate human-like characters we see besides Spear and his family. Being portrayed as much more primitive and ape-like than Spear, as they all have bleached, ragged hair, large sunken-in eyes, and very pale, almost albino-ish skin. They're also referred to as ancient monkey-looking cavemen in the Terror Under the Blood Moon animatic pitch. Taking this quote a little more literally, these guys also sort of resemble the hominid species Homo erectus, which were a species of human that not only
Get it. How do you know they're gay?
modern Homo sapiens,
What's up,
but
guys?
Neanderthals too, aka what Spear is based off of. Because these guys are described and shown as being more primitive than Spear, it's not too far-fetched of a conclusion to say that they were based off Homo erectus. Also, real quick, another big mystery that's left unanswered in this episode was who was responsible for making the freaky-looking stone pillars and skull carvings that Spear and
You got ads coming into the stream? Is that a thing? What? Interesting. Wait, why did it tell me to hearth? What the fuck?
come across early on. And due to the way the primitive cavemen act, I would say it's unlikely that it was their doing. But yeah, after watching our dynamic duo take down their bloodbath adversaries, I hope that these dudes finally developed enough common sense to at least try and find a new place to live instead of constantly having to hide under rocks. I mean, come on, look at how hunchback they are. They're definitely gonna need a spinal surgeon at some point down the line.
I thought it said cute dinosaurs. It says cut dinosaurs.
The man-bats are the red dinosaur-sized bats that show up in episode 4 of the first season. Besides their immense size and grotesque facial features, the other notable thing about them is that they seem to have a symbiotic relationship with the giant spider that features in the same episode. We'll talk about that creature in a second, but the man-bats are quite mysterious, as there is still speculation as to why they're serving the giant spider. Given the relationship we see on screen, it seems that the bats bring back food to the giant spider, and in return she provides them shelter, I guess. According to Genndy Tartakovsky, the spider is supposed to serve as a sort of fridge for the bats, I guess using her webs as a way to store and preserve their food in. The bats hunt around the surrounding areas near their cave where they capture their prey and take them back to
why that doesn't really make too much sense to me, only because like why wouldn't they just eat them on the spot? Like why would they need to store the food unless there was harsh winters where that symbiotic relationship would be absolutely like necessary? That seems bizarre to me, but okay.
The cave where they are then dealt with by the giant spider. The bat's prey varies from things as small as the monkey-looking cavemen that were mentioned earlier to as big as full-on dinosaurs. Overall, the man-bats are absolutely terrifying and help contribute to the show's first dive into a horror-related episode. The Mega Spider is the second enemy that shows up in episode 4 alongside the Man-Bats. The Mega Spider, as the name implies, is a massive spider that dwells inside a high cave and seems to serve as a sort of outlet in preserving any food that the Man-Bats bring in. As mentioned earlier, the relationship between the bats and the spider isn't 100% clear, so I can't tell for sure if that's the true purpose of their alliance. But this was—
maybe all the bats are fetishists and want to fuck the spider. But the spider's like, honey, you better give me some food. And then they get her food. But she still doesn't put out. That's all I got.
Was said by Tartakovsky during the episode's pitch meeting, although things from the final product have been known to change from their early development stages, so who knows if this still holds up. Regardless of that, there does seem to be some sort of attachment between the bats and the spider, because shortly after the spider is introduced, Spear and Fang fight it off and eventually kill it by impaling its head with a severed triceratops horn. After they kill the spider, they make their escape in time for the flock of man-bats to return and find the mega spider dead. Once they realize this, the way they react is quite interesting. They seem completely distressed about the mega spider's death and go after Spear and Fang after making this discovery. By the way they reacted, it's almost as if they had lost something close to them. Maybe this is them realizing they no longer have a way to preserve the food they always bring in? Or did the mega spider serve a greater purpose to them? Maybe it served as a queen of some sorts? I guess we'll never really know for sure. Lula was a part of the Witch Coven in episode 7, Coven of the Damned. Lula ends up being one of the few characters within the show that actually empathizes with Spear and Fang's losses. During the episode, there is a scene in which Lula uses her witch powers to stop time completely, and time travels back to when Spear lost his family to the Red Rex Pack. She does the same for Fang, witnessing both of our main characters losing their families, to which she reacts in a way that's surprising to us as the audience, since a lot of the enemies within the show are rather bloodthirsty and terrifying. But Lula seems to genuinely feel bad for our characters. The reason for Lula's
this is another weird episode for me where I was like, what the fuck's going on? She was able to jump into she was able to like fucking jump into their minds and like look at their dreams and shit. And that's why she has empathy for them, because she was able to like do that. It was a bizarre episode. It was cool though. It worked out. It went really well. It was just another one of those episodes where I was like, what the fuck? Where's this show going? But it's still incredibly good.
Action is shown to us later in the episode where she ends up traveling back in time to her own past when she unfortunately lost her own daughter. In this flashback, Lula and her daughter are in the middle of a flower field, and what seems like a pleasant memory at first ends with Lula's daughter falling to her death off a cliff near the field. It is that point in which we can understand why she sympathizes with our main characters, and as a result helps them escape the Coven ritual that would follow that evening.
It's just, to be clear, it's because like they all had like the loss of a child, and that's why she empathized with them. The way that they have children though is fucked up. The way that the Lula and whatnot has kids, it's fucked up. They capture people, right? And then they suck their souls out basically, and then turn them into a baby. So it's a little bit, I would say, bordering maybe abuse or something. I don't know if it's pretty fucked up. What I'm trying to say, pretty fucked up.
Along with her time-stopping abilities, Lula is also able to transform into a crow and hypnotize living things, to which she uses to her advantage to help Spear and Fangs escape. And in the process, she ends up losing her own life, as the head witch, who was clearly not happy with her ritual being interrupted, kills Lula off-screen. The episode ends with a very bittersweet moment, as it shows Lula reuniting with her daughter in the afterlife in the same field in which they had their final good memory. This episode fucking sucks for how sad it is, and it's kind of ironic that I say that because it ended up being one of, if not my absolute favorite episode.
It was a good episode, and part of me was like, I kind of wish that she would permanently accompany them as like a new companion, and I was like, oh, this will be very interesting, like an interesting dynamic and scenario. But she didn't, and the episode ended really well. She got nay-nayed and her head got bit. She got literally shitted on. Not literally, but it was good.
Episode of the season. I think it's because it's just a breath of fresh air that there's an episode that primarily focuses on someone that's not Spear or Fang, and along with that, giving us a perspective of someone that we at first thought was an enemy, only to later find out that that's not the case at all. Overall, I really like Lula's character, and
it was like a victim of circumstances type of a thing. It's pretty cool.
And the episode itself.
Why goo goo gaga, I'm a baby. You know, it's interesting. I was watching them like, wow, this is a really fucked up way to have kids. But then I was thinking, it's like, well, if their souls are sucked out of their bodies and put into kids' bodies, wouldn't that mean, to a degree, they're being immortalized? Did I just make your brain shit and come by saying that? Probably.
Moving along, let's talk about some cut content that comes in the form of cut creatures. These would have all been animals that popped up in specific episodes at some point, but never made it in at the end of the day. The only reason we know about these guys in the first place is thanks to the animatic pitches. I highly recommend checking some of these out, as a lot of them contain various degrees of content that I haven't seen the light of day. Anyway, the three majorly scrapped creatures come in the form of Ankylosaurus and Slave the Scorpion, Dimetrodon and Spear and Fang, and lastly Styracosaurus and Plague of Madness. Much like a lot of the other scrapped content, it is unclear why each of these creatures were missing from the final product. Thinking about it logically, the most appropriate answer would most likely be related to time constraints or the showcase of the animals being unnecessary within their respective episodes. But it would be cool if we got to see each of these guys make a proper debut in Season 2, so we can see them in their full animated glory. Do any of you remember the monkey guys from Slave of the Scorpion? Because I didn't. To me, it just seemed like they were shoehorned in for plot purposes, with them kidnapping Mira for some unexplained reason, only to be stopped by Spear and Fang as well as Mira's captors. But the more I look at these guys, the more questions I begin to have. It's interesting because they seem like a mix of the ape men and Spear's race of cavemen, as they obviously look more like apes than humans, but they also use handheld weapons, much like Spear. In the animatic pitch for Slave of the Scorpion, they are referred to as monkey men type dudes. And at second glance, this quote could actually be a bit more literal, as the resemblance can also be found in the real-life hominid Homo habilis, the first humans which had monkey-like features. So even though they play such a minor role in the series, it's still cool to—
Monkey men type dudes. Yeah, I remember those things. They were kind of like completely unexplained. I was fucking confused, and then they kind of just rolled forward, and I ended up forgetting about them and not caring anymore.
Know where the inspiration for these guys may have come from, especially if this is supposed to be a reference to the bridge between humans and apes.
As I mentioned before, there's plenty of things that the animatics have that the final products don't, and one of those things are various deleted scenes that were cut before the animation phase of the show. I hesitate to call these scenes though, because a large amount of them are literally just very minor portions that don't even really feel like scenes. Really, a lot of the cut content on here were just very short shots within some of the episodes that were probably just cut due to time. Some of these kinds of shots show up in the animatics and nothing else. For example, one of the beginning shots of episode 1 shows a Dimetrodon running off screen after being briefly shown. Then there's the extended shot of Spear and Fang suspensefully making their way through the long grass while trying to avoid raptors in the episode 4 animatic. And of course, as mentioned earlier, there's the cut portion of episode 6 where Spear manages to kill one of the wild dogs as it was trying to enter the cave to attack an injured Fang. But as far as I'm concerned, there's one deleted scene that actually did make it beyond the animatic stage and onto
Lo-Fi Guy super chatted $19.99. It's been a while since I showed some love. Loving all the content you make.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy listening while at work.
I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you so much for the $20, my man. It's more than generous. You didn't have to do that. Thank you so much, guys. Well, to everybody who donates, thank you so much. But thank you so much, brother.
Of animation development stage before being scrapped. And it was a scene in episode 10 that shows Spear and Fang hunting a Calicotherium, with Mira watching them as they eventually kill it. I found this scene on YouTube specifically with no audio, and the scene itself cuts pretty abruptly, so I'm not sure if there was more added on in terms of animation to this scene. And as far as to why the scene itself was cut, I would assume it was due to time as well, although I don't really understand why they would go out of their way to take it this far into development and just decide not to use it. But I will admit the scene
they had to get one more good commercial, probably an O'Reilly's commercial, and on the show. You remember those? O'Reilly's Auto Parts. Brought to you by O'Reilly's. I am officially affiliated, guys. Just kidding. I'm not. I would never do that. That would be a career suicide to sponsor Papa Gut. Whoa, get away from me, brother.
and clearly isn't that important to the episode in any way. So I guess it makes sense for them to cut something like this out.
Sure. Makes sense to me. Makes sense to me, handsome.
In episode 5, Rage of the Ape Men, we're introduced to a different type of enemy. I know that's not saying much since every episode has a different enemy,
yeah,
but this one is different in terms of how intelligently advanced they are. The Ape Men tribe are a clan of chimpanzee-like humanoids that have their own society. The head of the society comes in the form of an ape shaman, or at least that's what I'm assuming he is. And as important as it sounds, the ape shaman is more of a minor enemy compared to another character that features in this episode that was talked about earlier, Krog. Krog no doubt steals the show with how intimidating and dangerous he looks, especially after drinking the black substance. But the reason why the ape shaman and the ape tribe in general are lower on the iceberg than Krog is simply due to how little we know about them, making them a very mysterious entry. What we do know about the tribe is that they are a race of bipedal, white-coated humanoid apes that seem to capture unsuspecting animals or humans to take back to their coliseum, to which they will force their captives to perform gladiatorial-like battles with other opponents, all for the sake of the tribe's own entertainment. In episode 5, Spear and Fang are forced to fight Krog after Krog finishes off the first round of fighters, which was a group of other larger-sized gorillas. But unlike Spear and Fang, it seems that Krog actually wants to be there and fight. And given by the way Krog acts towards the ape shaman, it gives us a little more insight on how much of a respected figure the shaman is in the tribe. As according to this wiki page about Krog, it mentions that he seems loyal to the ape shaman and goes out of his way to please him. It's not 100% confirmed whether or not Krog is actually a part of this ape tribe or if he was just captured and forced to fight too. But with how he acts towards the ape shaman in mind, it could indicate that he's probably a part of this tribe and wants to earn the shaman's respect. In terms of appearance, what makes the shaman different from the rest of the tribe is the animal fur clothing and the bone jewelry that he wears, along with the staff that he carries with him. He's also the one who's in charge of the fights themselves and rewards the winner of the first round with an advantage to help them with the next round of fighters. And of course, this advantage comes in the form of the black substance that will be discussed later in the Iceberg. But for right now, it should be noted that the ape shaman is the one who takes charge of the black substance. One reference I found really interesting within the show was the reference to the elephant graveyard urban legend in episode 3, A Cold Death. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, the elephant graveyard is a famous real-life urban legend in which the oldest elephants in a herd go to a specific place to go off to when they reach a point in their life where they are near death. They go out to this—
There's a place in World of Warcraft like that. Wow, I'm a fucking nerd, dude. But it is inside of this place called the Deathless, just in case anybody was that curious.
Specific place that's often described as sacred, and they see the end of their lives here, where other older elephants have done the same thing time and time again, hence why it is called an elephant graveyard. And if you remember from episode 3 of
Where all my exes go to die. Jesus, I'm also fat, so I don't know why I said that.
Primal, the elephant herd takes the tusk of the elderly mammoth back to a graveyard in which we see other remains and skeletons of other deceased mammoths that have most likely traveled there to spend the rest of their time of life before inevitably passing away. But from what we've seen in episode 3, if there's a scenario in which a mammoth has died before being able to reach the graveyard due to unnatural causes or something of the sort, then the rest of the herd takes it upon themselves to retrieve whatever remains they can and take it to the graveyard as a way to honor their fallen herd member.
That was a weird part of the episode, though, because in that episode, like, they were all walking in, like, a snowstorm, and then one of the things collapsed. And then they just kind of kept walking. They're like, that motherfucker collapsed. And it's like, okay, well, if you cared so much, why the fuck did you walk away from your friend then? You know? It doesn't really make any sense. It was weird.
And in terms of the real-world urban legend, it's considered to be a myth at times, as older elephants instinctively traveling to a place they considered sacred enough to establish a graveyard for themselves to die in doesn't seem to be something that's 100% confirmed. If anything, it serves more as a theory to help possibly explain discoveries like the one made in Saxony-Anhalt, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, where 27 Paleoloxodon Antiquus skeletons were found in one area. In the case of the 27 Paleoloxodons, there's another interesting detail that I feel Primal also referenced in A Cold Death. And that's the fact that the tusks of the skeletons were missing, just like how Spear had taken the tusk of the elderly mammoth in that episode. And while this is also an interesting possible reference that Primal made, it may disprove the theory of an elephant graveyard.
Why do you think it's fake, man? I don't know. Like, to me, it's like, who knows, bro? Like, we are humans with, like, we believe in fucking shit like that. So, like, what's to say that they're not, you know? Like, what's to say that these motherfuckers aren't, also, you know? Who's to say that animals don't have, like, some kind of a level of, you know, like, religious or spiritual nature to them? You know what I mean? Like, who's to say, bro? Like, you think dolphins have that? It's just such an interesting concept to me.
Since with the tusks missing, it indicates a human presence was there and went out of their way to take the tusks. But this in itself is also just a theory, so who knows for sure. And as far as the elephant graveyard urban legend goes, it seems that some sources have concluded that it's fake while others are still open to theories revolving around it. But what do you guys think?
I don't know. I think I'm fucking hungry. Typical fat person, am I right, guys?
Oh boy, it's time to talk about Mira. So Mira was first introduced in the final episode of Season 1 Part 2, Slave of the Scorpion, where she met Spear and Fang and proceeded to tell them about her homeland. She starts to communicate with Spear through drawing in the dirt, telling him about her people and their enslavement at the hands of a different empire, leading to her being recaptured and taken away on a boat by the Scorpion guys. There's obviously a lot to talk about here, such as who the scary Viking dude she draws is, or why Mira speaks in Arabic.
My dad.
But I wanted to focus on how her departure from her main characters is setting up the third season of the show. Now, from what I've seen from theories online, many people...
I would never say my dad was a Viking. My dad's a fucking pussy, so... On me.
Believe that Spear and Fang will build a raft in an attempt to follow and rescue Mira, which is definitely possible. But another plot that I believe has a better chance of happening is what I'll refer to as the colonization plot. Basically how this would work would be instead of Spear and Fang building a raft and traveling to a new continent, the Scorpion people / Empire would arrive with more boats, along with a spooky looking Viking barbarian guy we see Mira telling Spear about, because judging by his reaction, it's clear that a confrontation between the two is being set up. If you think about it, it makes sense that the Scorpion Empire would return to Spear and Fang's land instead of the pair traveling to theirs. I mean, why else would a boat with...
That would have actually made a lot of sense, though, because yeah, in this episode, they kind of, I remember in the episode before, but they get in contact with this character named Mira, and they become like companions in some capacity. And I was like, oh, this is cool, and I like that. It was an interesting angle to add a new character. And then they like came and like took her and ran away, which was weird to me. Like, why wouldn't they, like, it was weird, but it would have made more sense for them to kind of colonize and like create like a large thing where they had like a massive force and they couldn't like, confront them instantaneously. So it wasn't like, you know, super practical for them to do that, obviously. That I feel like would have made like more sense, because they ended up crossing like a huge ocean on a fucking raft. I don't even know how they did it. The thing is that it actually introduced like it was actually really cool that they did it like that, because it introduced like one of probably my favorite episode. Maybe I don't know if my favorite. I keep saying my favorite, but one of my favorite episodes though was that like the two of them get separated after that whole thing goes down. And then what happens is they develop like they start getting develop relationships with other characters, but then they inevitably get pushed back together. So, you know, you got to take your ebb with the flow, am I right?
Literal slaves on it be there in the first place. It's very likely that these guys are probably here to colonize and establish new territory with the assistance of slave labor, all being done by Mira's people. Following this theory, Season 3 in a nutshell would pretty much be about Spear and Fang confronting the Scorpion Empire and the Viking guy while also trying to reconnect with Mira and save their homeland. It's a huge jump from what we're used to viewing on the show, but it would definitely be cool to see these modern humans react to all the dinosaurs and creepy crawlies that the protagonists have to deal with 24/7. This next one is probably the most...
Oh, you were saying that the elephants were fake for leaving their friend behind. That makes a lot more sense.
Theory that's ever been cooked up, which is that the witches are the ones responsible for creating the Plague of Madness. Now, even though this theory is popular and talked about a lot online, there's actually little evidence present in the show itself that backs it up.
Oh, it's probably because they used magic that was green, and then the plague was green. That's probably the only thing linking the two.
We see no reference to the plague in the episode Coven of the Damned, where the witches are introduced, which is pretty typical for the show, as Primal sort of follows the whole villain of the week structure, where Spear and Fang face a new threat each episode. So it's possible that the plague and the witches are just entirely separate entities separated by the sheer structure of the show, with little connection being made to anything throughout all of Season 1. However, I think that this formula of disconnection is going to come to a close when the third season of Primal eventually drops, because it's being set up in a way where we could be getting an overarching plot involving the Scorpion Empire facing off against...
It's over a year later, and they're talking about when the third season eventually drops. Maybe. They pretty much, to me, they tied the fuck up out of that story afterwards, you know? I'm just saying. They pretty much tied that story up.
Fang as they attempt to rescue Mira. Not only that, but the Plague of Madness along with the Med Sauropod was shown to be one of the few things that truly scared both Spear and Fang, even going as far as showing that creepy nightmare sequence with their flesh melting off their bones. And since Season 3 is setting up more of a consistent plot and eventual confrontation, as well as the Plague being a fan favorite iteration to the show.
And when they say nightmare scene, they mean like he actually had a nightmare that happened, which was like really interesting. I know that sounds like a stupid thing, but it's interesting how like impactful some of these moments are, where like they'll create some kind of a traumatic experience for these characters, where they're like, what the fuck? I just found it like really deep.
I think that it could be possible to see its return somewhere down the line, allowing us to be given some more insight into the source of the plague and if it really did
IMDb doesn't list it as
this would also act as some character development for both Spear and Fang, allowing them to face off against an old enemy and conquer their fears. Obviously this is all speculative, but it's also cool to imagine what our protagonists could be facing in future seasons and how the world and lore Primal will expand.
Primal's original concept was much different than what it ended up becoming. Around 10 or so years ago, Genndy Tartakovsky came up with an idea that revolved...
What is that? Is that Ben Savage? What the hell is that?
around a little Astro Boy inspired character and his dinosaur companion. Tartakovsky would sketch these ideas out and would make different versions of this character and his dinosaur, with all of them having a very cartoon and kid-friendly design to it. But according to Tartakovsky, the idea didn't click with him at the time, and as a result, he scrapped it. Little did he know, though, he would eventually revisit this idea.
Who would have thought that this show, Primal, could have... There's hair on my table. Who would have thought that this show potentially would have just become another kids show, and that like we would never would have gotten this like more mature, like rooted out, like really the masterpiece.
And so then a few years passed, and we were doing the Samurai Jack adult version, right? The last season, season 5.
I've seen some of that. So it's called Rule 34 Samurai Jack. It's not bad. I didn't know he actually made that though. It's a little raunchy, but cool.
When that hit, everybody really responded to the sequences with no sound. And I started to think, what if we could do a whole show with just those sequences? And they generally had no dialogue. And then I started thinking about like, well, what idea what idea makes sense for this? And then the little kid on the dinosaur came up again.
So during the final season of Samurai Jack, the audience had responded well to the more mature tone the show had, along with its more quiet sequences that allowed the visuals and music to tell the story. Because of this, Tartakovsky didn't just want to go in this same direction with Primal, but he wanted to take it a step further. He wanted to take his former idea of a kid with his dinosaur companion and age them up, along with making the show more adult-oriented by making it more violent and have little to no dialogue. And originally, this was simply going to be a 7 to 10 minute short, but after the final season of Samurai Jack had finished, Tartakovsky would show his idea off to his team, and before he knew it, what would have been just a short film would eventually become a whole season of a show that would become known as Primal.
How do I feel about the moon god that Mira prays to healing or reviving Spear before he actually dies? And maybe the scene with his daughter was some sort of dream sequence from Spear. I would think that that was a shitty cop-out. The ending of the show, Primal, was incredible to me because as a man, this is something I personally, maybe it's not because I'm a man, but I personally, I think a lot of people do, in some different ways, struggle with the concept of my own mortality. And the only way that I know of for anybody to become immortal is, and I know this sounds silly, but it's for their bloodline to continue, is to have children and raise those children well so that they can have children and they can raise their children well, etc., and so on and so forth. And so the ending of of Primal, where Mira, a non-lover to Spear, carrying his children, like having sex with him in like his time where he's dying, which I know sounds crazy. And to produce a child for him, that was a really impactful moment. And I was like, wow, like this is incredible. And I really identified with that. So.
One of the long-running mysteries in the first season of Primal comes from the 7th episode where we're introduced to a rather strange enemy. The 7th episode, titled Plague of Madness, begins with a herd of Argentinosaurs roaming around their nesting grounds, when all of a sudden a crazy-looking Parasaurolophus with green rotting flesh comes from the woods nearby and bites one of the Argentinosaurs. It's clear that the para had been infected with something that made it hostile and unpredictable, and when it bit the Argentinosaur, it had passed on that infection. And it wouldn't take long for it to take full effect over the poor Argentinosaurus. Soon its skin begins to turn green, it starts to vomit blood, and it becomes extremely hostile to the rest of its herd. And this would soon lead to a very brutal massacre that would scar many who watched this episode.
How fucked is it that they released that episode after like a year-long hiatus when COVID like really started to ramp up? That's what they're saying. It's kind of fucked when you think about it like that. Oh my god.
This had all been caused by a plague, and the first instance of this plague that we saw was in the very beginning of the episode when we saw the para infected with it. But how the para became infected and where it even came from is unknown, as it literally comes out of nowhere in the beginning of the episode. And the plague itself works in a very strange way. In the beginning, it's indicated that the way it's passed on from host to host is physical contact, specifically being bitten by the creature infected with the plague. But soon after it was bitten, it's shown during the massacre that the infected Argentinosaur is biting some of its own members of the herd, yet they don't become infected. Instead, they just die immediately after. The only way I could explain this is that maybe the plague only takes effect on its victims if said victim is still alive. And even though there are instances of the infected Argentinosaur biting others, it bit them on the neck area, and the wound itself could have been enough to kill them, thus preventing the plague from taking its full effect. If this is the case, then that would throw one of the few theories that people have made around it out the window, and that's the fact that this plague is actually a virus that's turning the dinosaurs into zombies. But if they were trying to stick with the zombie formula, then that would mean the Argentinosaurs that were bitten should have been reanimated then, right? Yet they didn't, meaning that this plague is just making its victims sick and hostile, rather than killing them and making them come back from the dead as zombies. Or who knows, there's definitely more to the plague and there's more theories centered around it, one of which we talked about earlier in this video. And this is due to the lack of
I guess that makes sense, like maybe it just makes them go fucking insane, but then they can actually die and they're not actual zombies, and we just like think of it through a zombie filter because, you know, zombies are a big boy thing, you know?
Information we have on the plague itself and its origins, so I'm probably missing something for all I know. But what the plague also manages to show us is how vulnerable our main characters are, especially Spear. All throughout the season, we've seen Spear as someone who's seemingly not afraid of anything and is prepared to fight to the death in any given situation, no matter who or what he's going up against. Very few times do we see him fear something to the point where he feels the need to resort to his flight rather than his fight.
True.
And while this may drop the idea that he's this fearless hero of the show, it actually strengthens his development as a character. The kind of vulnerability that's displayed only emphasizes the fact that Spear is a human being, and like all human beings, he will naturally have fears. And while we've seen that his biggest fear throughout the show's run so far is losing his friend Fang, in this specific situation, it seems that his biggest fear is this infected dinosaur. And who could blame him? One of the strongest and largest terrestrial dinosaurs that's always been depicted as a gentle giant in pop culture media is now everyone's worst nightmare, as it no longer resembles a—
Forgot about all that pop culture media presenting those dinosaurs. But I know what they mean. Like every time when you watch like Jurassic Park, it's not like they're usually like very gentle creatures. Just stop fighting me, bitch.
Gentle giant, but a bloodthirsty predator. And after being shown what this plague is capable of, it only made people want to know more about it, as the episode doesn't really give us a whole lot to work with. As far as a possible reappearance for the plague on this show, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I think it's unlikely that it will be revisited. A lot of people actually want the plague to be revisited in this series, myself included, so we could get some more information and or closure about it and its origins. And like I said just now, even though it seems unlikely, it doesn't mean it's completely impossible for it to make a possible return in Season 2. Since Season 2 will be exploring other regions with advanced civilizations, it's possible that maybe the plague's origin came from this very society and was somehow spread overseas. But this is all just speculation. The chances of this happening may be slim, so for now the plague just stands as one of the show's greatest mysteries.
Shady. Sorry, that was weird. Sorry, that was a cringe moment.
The scorpion's appearance in Primal is limited to a simple drawing that Mira makes of him in the sand. There's a sequence in the final episode in which Mira explains her story to Spear in her native language. As she explains her story, she draws pictures in the sand to give him a visual reference. And while I'm not familiar with whatever language she's speaking, what I can tell about this scene is that Mira explains that she and her tribe lived in peace before being invaded by a group of hostiles. This group then enslaved Mira and her tribe to take them overseas back to their homeland that's being ruled by a warlord that we know as the Scorpion. If you guys want a direct translation to this scene, I'll go ahead and link Altiori's video in the description down below, as she made a video specifically revolving around translating this scene. And
what's kind of interesting though is that like it was like Vikings were like the aggressors in this show, and then this was like a race of like black people, which seems pretty historically accurate when it comes to colonization. It's just not explicitly said like that, so it's just interesting.
Anyways, we don't really know much about the Scorpion as he hasn't made a physical appearance in the show yet. What we do know, given from Mira's story and drawing, is that he is a larger, stronger being with an army of men who are extremely advanced and intelligent, as they are armed with long-range weaponry and travel overseas by boats. What makes his drawing weird to me, though, is the horns that protrude from his head. Do these horns represent headwear of some type, maybe like a helmet or something? Or is the Scorpion a type of mythical creature that's worshipped by a society of advanced humans that are—
You know what's interesting, though? It's just like, I don't know, if you make it, like, if you humanize it, what's so interesting is that there's a lot of depictions of like weird people, like mermaids and shit like that, and a bunch of weird fucking creatures in different like mythologies across the world. And I think that a lot of those mythologies come from seeing somebody of like some kind of a different ethnicity that you've never seen before. This isn't just like, oh, hey, I went to China for a fucking week vacation and I was like, whoa, that's weird. This is like, you don't know that these other people exist, and you're introduced to them. And so, like, I wonder, like, how much of it is from, like, that. Like, when we saw manatees for the first time, that's what I believe we thought were fucking mermaids. We saw a manatee and went, what the fuck is that? Oh, my God. You know, and we couldn't perceive it because we've never seen anything before that we can identify with it or, you know, associate with it. So we're like, well, that's a fucking that's a person with a tail, you know? And so I wonder if if that's almost a nod to that, where like they saw a Viking with a helmet on that had like spikes on it, and they were like, "Oh my God, that's a person with horns." You know, like I wonder what the Pope would have looked like to people who've never seen the Pope before, like back in the day. Like, would he look like a weird fish man? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? That sounds weird, but
willing to do anything he orders them to do. I guess we'll just find out in the second season.
Okay, I know a lot of you have been waiting for this one, but it's finally time to talk about the Night Feeder. A fan favorite, this monstrous midnight assassin was armed with blinding speed and claws strong enough to cut straight through its victims. There's no doubt that it was one of the most dangerous creatures our heroes ever had the misfortune of encounter. But of course, Spear being the badass he is, along with
misfortune. Fucking Spear wanted to kill that motherfucker. That was also another interesting thing about Spear. He was always like doing these like basically altruistic things. He was also always trying to like defend like the weaker person. Except for when he was eating food. But outside of that, he was always trying to defend the weaker person. So he killed a creature they could have escaped from, even though Fang didn't want them to fight it because it was so like deadly. It was pretty cool.
Assistance from Fang brought an end to the demonic dinosaur in a blaze of glory. Now there's a lot to unpack here, so let's go one step at a time. First off, the Night Feeder is one of the most terrifying and mysterious creatures in the whole show, simply due to the fact that you don't actually see what's been hunting our main characters until the very end of the episode. And even
Bro, I kind of wish that they somehow made it so we wouldn't even see them at the end of the main episode of that episode. Honestly, I kind of wish that because you didn't see it the whole time, and at first I'm like, that's weird, but then I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. Like, you don't actually see the enemy. It's like so frightening, and it's one of those things where like in a horror show, when you put the face to the character, it becomes less scary once you can kind of identify the character. And I was like a little disappointed that they showed us it, but I wanted to see it. But then I wish that like we didn't see it. You know what I mean? It's like my curiosity, and then afterwards I'm like, you should have never showed it. You should have let our minds wander. That would have been so much better, you know?
And it's still hard to make out exactly what it looks like. It's a very similar tactic to how Steven Spielberg shot Jaws, with us getting perspective shots from the Night Feeder as it runs through the forest in order to quench its bloodlust, without actually showing us the animal itself, and it works great. It adds to the suspense of the scenes, and it lets the viewer imagine what monstrosity could possibly be causing all this damage. Secondly, the Night Feeder's amazing camouflage seemed to be aided by a black oil-like substance that it coated its skin with, as this oil was easily seen stuck to Fang's snout after she attempted an attack on the theropod. The oil-like substance may also be the reason why it took the Night Feeder mere seconds to be engulfed in flames, as if it were really a substance in similar property to oil, this would also help the fire spread across its.
I wonder if this is like a throwback to some kind of like ancient creature. Like what's the reference there?
Whole body extremely quickly. However, the presence of the black substance is important, as it could also be a huge connection to something we've already seen in the show. Fast forward to the middle of the episode, we get a quick shot of Spear and Fang observing a cute dinosaur, as it's referred to in the animatic pitch, briefly spooking the pair and running off into the forest. Now this scene was responsible for sparking a popular theory online that this tiny theropod was actually the Night Feeder itself, and that the dinosaur would undergo a werewolf-like transformation at night, under the moon's influence.
Interesting.
This is believed mainly due to there being many different shots of the moon at night during the episode, as well as the Night Feeder never making an appearance during the day, so the evidence sort of adds up. But the nail in the coffin of this theory has to be the oily black substance that comes off the Night Feeder during Fang's attack. I mean, sure, it could just be using the oil for camouflage, but where else have we seen a black gooey substance that is shown to make animals transform into stronger psychotic versions of themselves? That's right, the black substance.
Every time I would come in a girl, she'd become crazy because I'd be like, we're nothing. What are we? Nothing. And then they would go crazy. So my cum is actually the answer to that question.
Scene coated on the Night Feeder may be the same substance we see the ape shaman using in the episode Rage of the Ape Men. There's plenty of evidence to back this up too, the first one being Fang's reaction to the oil getting on her snout. In response, she goes into a distress, roaring and snarling all over the place and whatnot. We've also been shown throughout the course of the show that Fang has a great sense of smell. She is a tyrannosaur after all. So wouldn't it make sense that what she's smelling is resurfacing a past memory that involved the scent of someone under the black substance's influence who was also about to kill her?
Maybe, or it's possible that like even though the black substance may like bring some kind of like dramatic and powerful change to people, she was just afraid of it because it's still like some kind of disgusting foreign substance. They never indicated if that black shit tasted like garbage, so she may not need to have the PTSD aspect of it. She may just be like, oh, this is a bad thing to taste, but that's possible.
More evidence for this theory is shown in Rage of the Ape Men. When Spear drinks the black substance, we get a quick shot of the moon right before he transforms, in the same way that we get recurring shots of it in the Night Feeder. Spear's transformation not only causes him to turn into a monstrous version of himself, it also makes him go on an unstoppable rampage that ends in him slaughtering every last one of the Ape Men, similarly to how the Night Feeder acts throughout the course of the episode. Another thing to note is that the black substance transformation only seems to work under the moon's power, as we see Spear return to his normal self after dawn, which would also be the case for the Night Feeder, where we see the small theropod and.
Does that mean, that is interesting, does that mean that like I guess it wears off then in some capacity, because I was gonna say, like, does that mean that everything's all open? I mean that it's still in a system, but I guess not. I guess it also wears off. So you have to drink it, and then it'll eventually wear off, and the moon will also have like an impact on it going off.
next morning after the first night. So yeah, this theory is pretty exciting to talk about because there's a lot of evidence that backs it up. The only things left unanswered would be how the small theropod came in contact with the black substance in the first place. I mean, if it was able to cover its entire body in it, it would have needed access to a large supply. A possibility could be that the black substance is more tar-like than oily, and the theropod maybe fell into a tar pit of the substance, resulting in its transformation and the reason why its skin is covered in it. It would also explain why it dies so quickly to fire, as tar is also extremely flammable. But yeah, that pretty much brings an end to this theory speculation. Would also like to credit Thylacine13, sorry if I butchered your name, for providing the nuts and bolts of the theory. But yeah, the Night Feeder is just a really cool and mysterious character all around, and I hope we can get some more insight on its origin in the future, whether it be from the creators themselves or even in a future season.
Yeah, I almost kind of hope that they don't do that, because then it ruins the mystery. It was like when they added midichlorians to Star Wars. They're like, oh, the force is caused by fucking midichlorians. And I'm like, okay, well, that's lame. It removes the magic and the mystery from the fucking thing.
Look at the clock, time to talk about the head witch in the Coven. The episode Coven of the Damned was a real game changer for Primal, as the concept was far more supernatural than anything we had seen before, with magic, mind control, time reversal, all that jazz. But it definitely sparked people's interests, as it introduced some crazy concepts and ideas for fans to speculate about. Who were the witches? Who was their leader? And what were their goals? Something that has been pointed out quite prominently is that the head witch and the Coven share a lot of similarities with the Cult of Aku and a high priestess from the show Samurai Jack, which was also made by Genndy Tartakovsky. The cult is made up of only females who worship Aku, the main antagonist of Samurai Jack. The high priestess, their leader, also gave birth to female succulents who she raised as assassins in order to kill Samurai Jack, similarly to how the head witch is the one who gives birth or procreates in order to make daughters for the witches. With these connections present, it's obvious that these characters may have influenced the creation of the head witch and her coven, but let me assure you that they aren't simply copy and pasted over from one of Genndy's other shows, far from it. After doing some digging, I found out that the witches may have been inspired by traditional shamans. Now if you don't know what a shaman is, they're described as people who were able to achieve various supernatural powers by making contact with ancient spirits, and it is thought to have originated from various hunter-gatherer cultures, making it pretty damn ancient. The events that unfold throughout the episode and the practices the head witch and her coven undergo share a lot of similarities with shamanism, particularly what's referred to as classic North Asian shamanism. And there are many examples that make this apparent. Firstly, one of the traits of this shamanism was that the shamans were thought to be assisted by a spirit-like entity or group of spirits in the form of an animal when practicing magic, which could also act as a, quote, sexual partner. Now in Primal, we see that the witches reproduce by offering...
You know what's interesting about that? I'm going to be honest with you guys, as I watched Primal. Part of me always wanted that dude to fuck the dinosaur. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to see it, but like, I was like, these two should fuck. Their energy felt like they should fuck. I know that's weird because he's a dinosaur and she's, well, he's not a dinosaur. Actually, that's precisely why it's weird. But like, I was just like, should these two, I almost wanted to see it. Morbid curiosity, bro. You know? Just like I wanted to see Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. I didn't want to actually see it, but I was just curious. No, I'm just kidding. That second one was like weird. Bro, listen, I was like interested. I'm like, these two are like in love. Why aren't they fucking? All right, I'm sorry. Okay, it was an intrusive thought, and every time I give you guys my intrusive thoughts, you always tell me, Papa God, what the fuck's wrong with you? Come on, bro. Come on, dude. What would have been wrong?
Offering a sacrifice to the head witch, who transforms herself into an otherworldly Wendigo-like spirit that drains the victim's life force, using it to procreate. Following the earlier shaman trait, this is quite similar in the way that the head witch transforms herself into a spirit-like entity in order to give birth, or making new life. Since she has to transform or to call upon this spirit to procreate, it's very similar to the idea of a spirit acting as a sexual partner to a shaman from North Asian shamanism. But that's not the only similarity we see. There's a lot more evidence presented in the show that links the witches and shaman practices together. Some examples would be how shamans were known to have animal familiars that would obey their masters, just like the Pteranodon mount we see the head witch using, as well as Lula taking control of Fang for most of the episode. It was also apparently one of the distinguishing traits of shamanism for two shamans to combat one another in animal form, with the outcome of this combat acting as well-being for the victor and destruction for the loser. Sound familiar? And lastly, these shamans were most famous for being able to enter the spirit world by harvesting the power of supernatural forces, similarly to how we see Lula sort of time traveling to glimpse at her own and other characters' past. So with all these connections, is it safe to say that shamanism had some presence in the creation of the head witch and the coven? Well, we can't say for sure, because it's not like the guys behind Primal to sit back and explain everything to us, am I right? But since the episode Coven of the Damned ended in a way where the witches could potentially make a return, I hope we get to see them again in the future, and possibly get some further insight into their origins.
I mentioned earlier that there are a ton of things shown within the animatics that look a lot different from their final products. A lot of these differences are very minor, and were probably only changed to help fit the story better for the episode. But one of the more striking differences is the episode 9 animatic, the Night Feeder. Throughout the whole season, Primal has explored different areas of horror, with some having a more violent and in-your-face kind of tone to it, like Terror Under the Blood Moon and Plague of Madness, while an episode like Coven of the Damned used a style of dramatic horror to tell a very depressing story about loss. But episode 9 ends up using paranoid horror as a way to keep the audience at the edge of their seats and terrified throughout the entire 20 minutes. And one thing that's essential with
that does make sense, especially since Fang was so afraid of the thing, and like Fang is supposed to be like the fucking bloodthirsty killer, so when that's afraid and its survival instinct step in and say don't fuck with this, bro, you go like, damn bro, you should not be fucking with that shit, dude.
Paranoid horror is to show as little as possible, as the whole point of this area,
especially since that theory is true with the whole black tar substance, like transforming it into like a fucking were dinosaur, which is actually a very cool concept. That'd be actually awesome. The problem would have just solved itself, you know what I'm saying, dude?
The horror genre is to rely on the unknown to terrify your audience, while at the same time showing them certain aspects of the unknown as a way to give them clues as to what it could be. And the show does a fantastic job with this, as throughout most of the episode, we aren't able to get a glimpse of the Night Feeder itself. Yet we are shown what it's capable of. It's able to kill off entire herds of dinosaurs, move at incredible speeds, and is strong enough to destroy a whole tree with a single slash. These clues only make us more invested in wanting to know what this creature is and how it is able to cause such destruction. And eventually, the Night Feeder is revealed at the very end of the episode. After finding out its weakness of fire, Spear and Fang light the Night Feeder ablaze, revealing it to be some sort of theropod dinosaur, possibly a raptor of some type. But this reveal had left many feeling like this was a rather anticlimactic ending, as a dinosaur as the main enemy didn't feel like it was anything new. But despite this, it led to very interesting debates and speculation as to what it could actually be and how it managed to have these different abilities. But all of this has already been talked about here. What makes this whole thing weird is the original concept for the Night Feeder and what it was actually going to be, because originally it wasn't going to be a dinosaur at all. This is what the Night Feeder looked like in the episode's pitch. And even from looking at this picture, I still don't really know what the original intention for the Night Feeder was at this point of the episode's development stage. And this is one of the many reasons why it's far down the list. Not only is it completely different from the Night Feeder we would all come to know, but it's also hard to tell what Tartakovsky and his team were going with this original idea. As far as the behavior goes, there wasn't anything new in the animatic that we didn't already see in the finished episode. In fact, the episode follows pretty much everything in the animatic, with the one noticeable difference being the Night Feeder's physical appearance.
I wonder why they changed it, or maybe that was just like a rough draft and they were just kind of debating on it. I mean, if anything, that contributes to the theory that it was like some kind of a fucking werewolf scenario. Because maybe they wanted to make it like a little bit of a throwback to that. It's kind of also a mystery. It's interesting.
And given from the few shots we see of it, its build looks much more robust and sturdy, as it has a short neck, a small head, and thick arms with sharp claws. This is the most we can actually see of it, but regardless of our limited view, we can tell that it was clearly made to look more like a monster, whereas the second version was made to look more like a theropod dinosaur, and as a result, its build was much more slender. And it's possible that this was the very reason for the Night Feeder's change. As I mentioned before, we know that the Night Feeder moves really fast and can kill herds of dinosaurs at a time in a very quick and brutal fashion.
That made her build different,
baby. It would make sense for the Night Feeder to have a more slender build to achieve this level of agility. It's clear that Tartakovsky wanted the Night Feeder to be some sort of monster, but maybe they just thought it would be a better idea to give it a different form that would
maybe like Gabby Hanna
fit more realistically with its given abilities. And this form would eventually take the shape of a raptor.
It does look a lot. That does look a lot more like Gabby Hanna. What if I'm the monster?
Or some type of theropod dinosaur, giving us one of the show's most mysterious and terrifying yet memorable enemies.
Enemies, that's what I call them. Conclusion.
And that was the Primal Iceberg. Thank you all so much for watching. This was a very fun video to put together. I never made my own iceberg chart before, mainly because I was too lazy to, but it was actually really fun to do, especially with someone who loves the same topic of the chart as much as I do. And that reminds me, thank you so much to Pish for helping me out with this video. Pish wrote his own script for all the stuff he read out, and on top of that, he also made the intro for this video. So if you like his commentary and editing style, definitely go check his YouTube channel out where he plays dinosaur games and has dinosaur-related discussions. And speaking of Pish, I'm really excited to tell you all that Pish and I have created our very own Discord server.
That was good. I like that. Thank you for forcing me to watch that, guys. Actually, it was pretty good. That was a fun iceberg video. That was a fun different video. It was different. Everyone, thank you so much for watching, and a special shout out to all my Patreon patrons, my YouTube members, and my Twitch subs. If you'd like to learn how you can contribute even more than you already are by simply watching the video, you can check the links down below, which will unlock a special feature depending on the platform that you subscribe to, such as Patreon here, that will get your name right here on this wall. Thank you so much, guys, again for watching, and have a good one.